We've got some more news about EA Sports College Football 25 to go over today. So earlier today, EA Sports did release the top 25 offenses and the top 25 defenses for the upcoming game, which means a lot of people are going to be mad today because anytime somebody ranks anything, everybody gets mad. It doesn't matter who's ranking it. It doesn't matter what's being ranked. No one's ever going to agree, and there's really never a definitive way to rank anything. So it's always a big topic of debate. I've already seen a lot of people on Twitter being really angry today. I know from dealing with Madden over the years, people always get mad over the rating. So it's always kind of a fun thing to talk about because let's be honest, everybody thinks their team is top 5 or top 10 at everything. And it's just not the case. Not everybody can be top 5 or top 10. Also, there's always going to be some controversial rankings in there to stir up some debate. So we're going to hop right into it. But if you don't want to miss out on any of the upcoming news for this game, we're going to have the Dynasty Deep Dive, I believe, next week. We're going to have some gameplay coming soon as well. Make sure to subscribe and turn the bell icon on so you don't miss those videos when they go live. I'd really like to hit 600K subs before the release of this game, so if everybody watching just subscribed, we could hit that number in a few days. So here on their website, they made a post about the offensive and defensive power rankings, and they kind of explained what goes into them, and they said the development team meticulously examined hundreds of thousands of data points to arrive at our team's power rankings. With the help of our friends at Pro Football Focus, the team analyzed all 134 rosters, thousands of players, years worth of game film, and mountains of stats, ultimately arriving at our team's power rankings. The rankings are subject to change in future updates, which they will. These things will probably change every week, just like they do in Madden. So in some ways, it's kind of a little bit pointless because within a few weeks of the game being out, there can be some pretty significant differences here, but this is just a starting point. Also, something to note before we jump into this that you need to consider is that rankings for something like this are also heavily projection based. So they are going off of, previous years. They're going over the rosters, who teams brought in, who they lost, coaching changes, all of that stuff, of course, but they're also in some ways projecting what they think they're going to do this year. So just because a team did good last year, well, if they lost a ton of good players, if they changed coaches and there's uncertainty, well, they might not be projected to do as good this year. So you have to kind of factor that in as well. But regardless, there's going to be a lot of disagreements because that's just how rankings work. And there's even some I disagree with. So let's look. Here are the top 10 offenses to start. We have Georgia at a 94 overall, Oregon at a 94 overall. So they're tied for the top spot technically. We've got Alabama at 91, Texas at 91, Ohio State at 89, LSU at 89, Miami at 89, Colorado at 89, Missouri at 89, and Clemson at 87. Now, the first thing I've seen people complain about just off of the top 10 was that Colorado was too high, and this is pretty high based off what they did last year. However, I do think they're projected to be much better this year. I mean, Sanders and Hunter have gotten better every year they've played together. They've returned a lot of players. They've got continuity. Will they be in the top 8 or technically they're rated as a top 5 offense if you look at it, because you need to pay attention to the overall, not just the number. Technically, they're tied for top 5. So I don't think they're going to be that good, but they're probably going to be significantly better than they were last year. But again, you got to factor in their guys on the cover of the game. Colorado is like a hot button topic. A lot of people hate Colorado. So I do think they move some people maybe higher or lower than they should be to kind of get some conversation going. And also the fact that they're using Pro Football Focus, that alone for a lot of people is a hot topic thing, because some people live and die by PFF, and then other people absolutely hate PFF and think that their system isn't very good at all, or at least that it's not good for every player or every position group. There's never going to be a definitive way to rank these players. No one's going to ever agree fully. So I try not to get too angry over this stuff. Now we're going to move on to 11 through 25. So we've got a few teams here at 87 overall. So keep in mind, all these teams are technically tied for the 10th spot because they're all 87 overall. You've got Utah, Penn State, Ole Miss, Kansas, Arizona, and NC State. Next, we've got a bunch of teams at 85 overall. We've got Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Memphis, SMU, and UCF. And then we've got the remaining 83 overalls to round out the top 25, which is Florida State, Oklahoma, Virginia Tech, and USC. Now, keep in mind, this is something else you've got to pay attention to, because I think they do this on purpose to stir up conversation, to get people mad a little bit, because when people get mad at the list, they're going to comment on them more, which gives it more promotion. There's probably a lot of teams that are at 83 overall offense, and they're going to leave some of them out of the top 25 for different reasons. They're going to leave them out because maybe it's going to stir up conversation. conversation, or maybe because they think some of these other teams are just more notable or they're going to create more conversation. Because, for example, a team that I saw a lot of people say should be in the top 25 is Tennessee. Now, obviously, they lost some important players, but I would expect Tennessee to still be a pretty good offense. They very well may be rated at 83 overall offense, which would mean technically they would be a top 22 offense, because there's all these other teams that are at 83 overall and it starts at the 22 spot. So if you're an 83 overall offense, you're technically a top 22 offense in the game, but they have to cut off the 25 list somewhere, and they might just leave out Tennessee because they think, ooh, people are going to talk about this if we don't actually put them in a 25 spot. Now, another thing I saw people complain about is, how is Michigan not in the top 25? They're the defending national champs. Well, again, they might be top 22 if they're 83 overall. I'm sure they're going to at least be in the 80s because they're Michigan. But also, Michigan isn't really known as some elite offense either. They were always known as an elite defense, or at least recently. Last year, they were like 70th in yards per game. But again, you factor in other things. You know, they pulled starters early in some games because they were winning so much. You also can factor in that, you know, their play style is a little bit more ground and pounder it was. But then you also got to factor in, well, they lost a lot of big name players. They lost the QB, the running back. They lost other players. They lost their coach. So there's a lot of uncertainty about maybe how they're going to do this year. And they already weren't a team, even in their best season in recent memory, they weren't even a team that was considered an elite offense anyway. But again, they might actually be in this top 25 if they're at 83 overall. We just don't know because these are only the teams that they've shown us. Now, we're going to get into the defenses, but really quickly, let me shout out today's video sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. If you like sports and you like winning money, then you've got to be on Underdog Fantasy playing their pick'em game. Basically, all you have to do is pick higher or lower on a wide variety of player stats, and if they hit, you can win some big money. But the best part about Underdog Fantasy is they'll give you a free play at sign up, and they give you free money to play with. So for example, during the WNBA season, on random days when you sign up, they'll give you a player like Caitlin Clark to get a single point. All she has to do is get 1 point, and that's it. They've also got a big special going on this weekend for UFC for both new users and existing users. They're going to give you Alex Pereira to get over 0.5 strikes, meaning all he has to do is get 1 strike in his match, which he obviously will, and that's it. That leg will win. And if you sign up using my code RAY, R-A-Y, they'll give you up to $250 in bonus cash to play with, and you just can't beat that. So now let's look at the top 10 defenses. So we've got Ohio State at a 96 overall, we've got Georgia at a 94 overall, and then we've got a bunch of teams at a 90 overall. We've got Oregon, Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Michigan. And then we've got Texas, Penn State, and Utah at an 88 overall. Now, again, I'm going to kind of show you how people sometimes will get mad at this, but you have to pay attention. So some people will be like, Michigan at 7, even though that's still very high to be a top 10 defense, Michigan at 7 feels low. Michigan is one of the best defenses they were last year. They're projected to be another top defense this year. But when you look at it, they're technically a top 3 defense because there's multiple teams that are rated 90. Now, of course, could they have put Michigan in the 3 spot? Sure, but putting them in the 7th spot, again, I feel like they do this to stir up the conversation. It looks like they're rated worse than teams that they're actually on par with, but really they're a top 3 defense in the game. And the same goes for 88 overall, because if you look at the 11 through 25 spot, you'll notice that there's a number of 88 overalls as well here. So you've got Florida State, Oklahoma, and Iowa. Iowa's another one of those schools that's always been known, at least lately, for having an amazing defense. Like, their offense is awful, but their defense is so good that they win a lot of games. Now, could you have put Iowa in the top 10? You could have put them as high as number 8 because they're 88 overall, but they leave them out of the top 10 because that's going to stir up conversation, even though they're technically rated as the 8th best defense in the game. Then you've got a few 86 overalls with Virginia Tech, Wisconsin, USC, and Auburn. And then you've got a ton of teams at 84 overall: LSU, Texas A&M, Colorado, Oklahoma State, Louisville, North Carolina, Kansas State, and Florida. And here is where the next thing comes into play. So you can see that there's a bunch of 84 overalls here, and there's probably a lot more than this. The same with offenses, how they ended at 83. There's probably a ton of 83 overall offenses, and there's probably a ton of 84 overall rated defenses, meaning that this is kind of the bottom tier for the defenses of at least the top end schools, right? The smaller schools are probably going to have worse ratings because here's the thing. When you look at a school like LSU, for example, usually they were good on defense, but lately they've been very bad on defense. But they're still overall going to have higher end talent than the smaller schools. Even if last year they performed worse than some of those schools, when you factor in who they play and you factor in, you know, the type of recruits and the talent that they have on their team, they've got some guys on that defense that are going to go high in future drafts. But but, you know, the coaching scheme or the way they're being used might not be the best. But they still have top end players, so they're still not going to be rated in like the 70s, for example, like some of the lower schools may be, because they just don't have the same type of talent. They don't get the big name recruits. So when you're looking at these 84 overalls, this is really the bottom tier of like the notable schools, because people are saying, well, how the heck is Colorado in the top 20 or technically top 18 at an 84 overall? They were one of the worst defense. I think in yards per game, they were definitely bottom 10 last year. Now, granted, this year they'll probably be better than that. They're projected to be better than that, but they were really bad last year. So to have them in the top 20, that's something that people are going to talk about and say there's just no way they should be top 20. And I agree. I don't think they should be in the top 25. But again, when you're looking at some of the talent that they have, and you're looking and you understand that, well, 84 overall for these bigger name schools that get a lot of attention and they get a lot of recruits, 84 overall defense is not considered a good defense. You're not really considered, in my opinion, a good defense until you're like in the 88 overall. At least that's how Madden has done it in the past. So I'm thinking they're using a lot of similar criteria when they're rating these teams. If you're not like an 88 overall or 87 overall or better, you're not really that great of a defense for a top end school. Because again, I mean, even USC being at an 86, that's not great, but it also feels higher for the level of defense they've played lately. But you also have to factor in, you know, how are they being projected maybe this year? Or again, how are they going to compare to the very lower end schools that don't have the type of talent that USC has? Even though USC doesn't put it together on the field, they still have better talent than a lot of schools out there. So I just kind of say that to say, when you see some of these teams at the bottom of these top 25 lists, there's probably a lot of other schools that have similar ratings here, and these are kind of considered not so good. But because they're listing certain teams like a Colorado up so high, that's going to trigger a lot of people to comment and say there's no way they should be that high, which I agree with. But at 84 overall is technically not going to be that good for a defense in this game. When you got Colorado and you're going up against these top offenses, right? These offenses that are 88 plus, you're going to kind of feel the gap there. They're not going to have the type of players that are going to be able to stop Ohio State's offense or Texas's offense or, you know, Penn State's offense, for example. And another thing you have to consider with all of this that I don't think a lot of people know, and I only know it because I've just dealt with Madden for so many years. Number one, EA doesn't really do a very wide rating scale. They never have. I think it would be better if they did. I think it would differentiate more. I think you might see it a little more in this game because there's just so many schools. So you will see, you know, some in the 70s, but like with Madden, you don't really see a very wide scale. And even in this game, you're not going to see a very drastically wide scale. So the difference between, you know, an offense or a defense that's rated 90 or 84, that's a pretty significant difference with the way EA scales, because you're probably not going to see a lot in the 70s. So low 80s is going to be kind of the bottom tier, at least again for the bigger name schools. Another thing, in my opinion, again, just from dealing with Madden for years, things like the team overall or the offense and defense overall, to me, is mostly a fake number. You can kind of dress that up to make it look like what you want, but the thing that matters is when you look at the player ratings, because even in Madden, you'll look at a team that has a high rated offense and you're like, how is their offense really rated that high? But then you look at the players and their specific ratings and you're like, this is not really that high of an offense. It doesn't really add up. And they do this a lot in Ultimate Team, even with individual players. They'll put a high overall on a specific player they're coming out, kind of makes it look enticing, but when you look at the ratings on that guy, it doesn't match up with what the overall is showing. It seems as though the overall is inflated. So I say that to say, when it comes to like the overall rankings, they do inflate stuff sometimes to make it look a certain way. And especially with this, I'm assuming, you know, big fan bases like USC or Colorado, they're probably going to bump them up a little bit higher than what they actually are, just so the fans aren't like losing their minds like, oh my god, my team's rated so low. But realistically, the thing that's going to matter is when you look at the individual player ratings, because they even do this with player overalls as well. There's certain specific ratings you can bump up to kind of artificially increase a player's overall. I can increase a guy's overall by just maxing out his awareness, for example, but awareness in these games doesn't make a super drastic difference on field, because as long as your awareness is at a certain threshold that it's not god awful, you're going to be decently aware. And then especially if you're clicking on to these players, you're really the awareness yourself. But if they want to increase the overall artificially, they can bump that up really high. The ratings that really matter in these games that you need to look at when it comes out is like, what are their speed, what are their throw power, what's their route running, what's their tackling, what's their coverage, what's their blocking. Those are the things that matter. So when you see like a high overall that seems inflated, like if you see, okay, Colorado's got an 84 defense, that just doesn't seem quite right. When the game comes out, if you go look at their defense, I would imagine they're going to have some pretty inadequate players on defense, and that's really what matters. So I think they like to dress up the overalls just to get people talking, just to get fan bases going back and forth. I don't really think, in my experience with Madden, those numbers have ever been accurate. The accurate numbers are going to be the individual player ratings. Now, if you want to know more about presentation for this game, we just got a bunch of info on that yesterday, and you can check out this video right here on the screen.